So the topic I was asked to speak about was innovations in dialysis. And I think it's an interesting subject, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak about it. I do work at the George Institute, and we're very proud that last week the Times Educational Supplement listed all of the medical research institutes in the world, and the George was number 33 in the world for the impact of its research, and number 1 in Australia. So while our institute isn't perhaps as well known as some of the other medical research institutes, when it comes to having an impact on patients and their lives, we rank number 1, and that's something we're really proud of. As well as being a professorial fellow, I'm, as you can see, the medical director of Ellen Medical Devices, and I think that's the real reason I've been asked to speak to you this afternoon, and this is a passion of mine. So after talking more generally about innovations in dialysis, I'm going to spend a little bit of time telling you about an Australian innovation, which I think you'll agree with me is a really exciting one. So my talk really is in 3 parts. Firstly, the general thought of recent innovations in dialysis. Secondly, just a brief look at the portable, wearable artificial kidney. And finally, our own project, the Affordable Dialysis System. When you Google recent innovations in dialysis, the first 10 articles that come up all start the same way. There isn't any innovation in dialysis. So why isn't there more innovation in dialysis? So why has dialysis not changed? And the picture on the right there is the very first dialysis machine invented by Wilhelm Kolff in Germany and first used to treat a patient in 1943. So actually it's 75 years since dialysis started to be used in human beings, and that's a bit of an anniversary. And the machine down the bottom looks very different, but actually works pretty much exactly the same way. So there's, apart from adding a TV screen at the top and lots of buttons to press, the principles of pumping blood out of the patient, cleaning it up and putting it back into the patient has changed very little in the last 75 years. And that's why this heartfelt statement at last year's meeting of the American Society of Nephrology is so poignant. My mother relied on dialysis for 14 years. From her first day to her last, little changed in her treatment. We would hardly tolerate such stagnation in our smartphones or in cancer treatments. The American taxpayer is billed annually $35 billion for a decades-old technology with mortality rates higher than most cancers. The current standard of care simply isn't acceptable. Those are phrases you can read over and over again whenever the subject turns to innovation in dialysis. And you know, in my lifetime, a computer has changed from the size of this room to the size of my watch, but dialysis really has not changed. This statement was made at the announcement of an initiative called Kidney X. And if you want to read about it, it's kidneyx.org. I'm giving you the little references in the bottom right-hand column there. And Kidney X is a search for innovation in dialysis, and you can read more about it at their website, kidneyx.org. And they're kicking off in late 2018, and they're going to be asking for entries for a large amount of money put up by the American government for innovation in dialysis. And if you're interested in tracking this, I strongly advise you to visit kidneyx.org during the month of October, because I think in about the 3rd week of October, there's going to be a huge announcement about a very significant amount of money being available for innovation in dialysis. If you're interested in this stuff, another good website to visit is this one, the Centre for Dialysis Innovation, which is at a university in the northwest of the USA. And you can see the main people there, Bruce Hines, Eric Stuve and Xiao Jiang, are all engineers. And this is a national centre which is trying to find new ideas for haemodialysis. And again, you can see there's a column there for patients and their families. And if you want to track dialysis innovation, those 2 websites are really good ones to visit regularly. But let me tell you a little bit about innovation in haemodialysis practice and in chemistry. The remarkable observation is that survival on dialysis varies enormously between countries. The risk of death on dialysis in the USA is 15% higher than in Europe and 33% higher in Japan. So one of the best things I can advise you if you need to start dialysis is to move immediately to Japan, and your chance of survival will grow enormously. What this really tells you is that it's not about innovation, this variation in survival. It's about how meticulously well the dialysis is done on a day-to-day basis. And the Japanese are among the best in the world at just doing beautifully in dialysis. I have to tell you, it's not for lack of trying that there isn't a lot of innovation. There have been many trials published in recent years, more dialysis for longer periods, high flux membranes allowing faster movement of solutes across the dialysis membrane, convection versus diffusion, different ways of getting water out of the body, changing the sodium profile, changing the potassium profile. Each of these trials have cost many millions of dollars and taken many years. And the sad thing is that none of these changes have improved survival in hemodialysis, which within a given country has stayed pretty much the same, although the variation between countries is huge. And if you'd like to read a little bit more about that, this review article by Lemire, did 20 years of technological innovation in hemodialysis contribute to better patient outcomes, is a really good one to read. I've chosen references for you that are available online, and where there's no paywall, you can just download them and read them. And this one is a good one because it goes through, point by point, all of the innovation and the sad story that really none of it has passed the best test, which is improving patient outcomes. The story is a little bit better in peritoneal dialysis, where there's been two really significant recent advances. The first is the automated cycler at night, and the second is using the Y-set rather than a single bag. I was talking to this about the people at the Baxter booth at the trade fair next door, and they said, and you've got to add in our brand new system, our brand new machine, which sends patient data daily across the internet back to the doctor. And I said, well, has that been shown to improve patient outcomes? And they said, oh, we're still doing the tests. So I'm setting a really high bar here. I want to demonstrate, I want the data to demonstrate to me and to you that the innovation has actually improved patient outcomes. And we had a talk yesterday from the ANZSN mob about peritonitis and peritoneal dialysis, and here's the latest data from that. And you can see that actually things really have improved. The number of peritonitis episodes per year was up around 0.6 in 2004, 6, 8, and in recent years it's fallen down to around 0.35, and the most recent data there, 2016, it seems to be lower again. So the changes, the innovations in peritoneal dialysis, I think it can be argued have really reduced the rates of peritonitis. And that's the test that I'm giving for innovation. I promised to talk about the wearable artificial kidney. There are 5 different devices in development around the world. There's Dr. Victor Gura, who's at the University of California, wearing his own invention, the wearable artificial kidney. They're the only ones, they're the only group that's actually published their data, and it's really quite discouraging. They set up a trial a year or so ago of 10 patients who wore the device for just 24 hours. They all actually had a hemodialysis session before they put this gizmo around their waist. 2 of them had to stop after a few hours because of blockages in the tube, and they had to abandon the trial when only 5 patients had completed 24 hours because there were so many technical difficulties, and they never got their 10 patients done. They've spent around $3 million on this project already, and they estimate that there's another $3 to $5 million to spend and another 5 to 10 years before they could approach anything that could actually be used in the clinic. I really take my hat off to these people for their persistence with this idea, but I think you can see, even just from the size and the shape of that machine, that it's not something that anyone would want to walk around the streets of Adelaide, even the streets of Adelaide, wearing in the near future. So this is currently close to science fiction, and we have to just wait. So let me turn now to my own project, and I wanted to tell you about the Affordable Dialysis Prize because, you know, most of our discussions today have been about Australia, but there's a big wide world out there that's in serious trouble due to lack of dialysis. It's safe and effective treatment for kidney failure, but it's very expensive. Costing done back in 2010 showed $53,000 per patient per year here in Australia, probably a bit more than that now. So that's $800 million of taxpayer dollars. But look at the figure for the USA, more than $100,000 per patient per year, or $34 billion, about 8% of the whole US health budget. So this is an Indian woman called Baby. Lots of Indian people have English language nicknames, and her English language nickname is Baby. She's from Haryana in northern India, and she has 4 children, and she has end-stage kidney disease and was prescribed dialysis 3 times a week. But she could only afford to visit the dialysis clinic once a week. And in fact, because you have to pay for dialysis in India, she and her husband, who's a labourer, had to take their kids out of school, because you also have to pay for school in northern India, to pay the cost of her once-weekly dialysis. We got to know her because we were making a YouTube documentary about the need for dialysis in India. And we filmed her and we told her story. And when we went back to the home a couple of months later to show her what we'd done, we found that she had withdrawn from dialysis so her children could go back to school, and she had died. A very sad story that someone who's 38 years old, for whom safe and effective treatment is available in our country, had to face death because a dialysis was unaffordable. But that's just one small, sad story of a very large picture, because the George Institute estimates that 1.4 million people, up to 1.4 million people, die in India every year because they can't afford dialysis. And that's a very large number. And in fact, we studied this and we published it in The Lancet back in 2015, and you can read this online if you want. And this is a map of the world. And the countries that are orange or pink are countries where people who need dialysis get it, because the community pays for everyone. And you can see Western Europe, the USA, parts of South America, Australia and New Zealand. But the countries that are yellow or blue is the countries where people are dying because they can't afford dialysis. And it includes India, it includes just about all of the ASEAN countries to our north, and of course most of Africa, and it also includes Russia and most of China and many other countries in the middle there. So what our research showed, if you want to boil it right down, is that 10 million patients need renal replacement therapy every year. 2.6 million receive it, everyone else dies. Up to 7 million avoidable, preventable deaths a year, and what are we going to do about it? Well, the George Institute announced a prize, the Affordable Dialysis Prize, and it was sponsored by the 4 organisations on the right there, and we were looking for a new, disruptive, affordable dialysis system which is light, portable, runs on solar power, can purify water from any source, is just as safe and effective as conventional dialysis, costs less than $1,000 to manufacture and a few dollars a day to run. I was privileged to chair the global expert judging panel, and we unanimously chose a winner. And this is what it looks like. It is a little still about the size of a waste paper basket, which can purify water from any source. And it's a little care station, a breadboard with a PD bag on it. And the idea is that you get an empty bag with a bit of salt and sugar in it, and you can prepare water on the spot using solar panel for power, fill up your dialysis bag, and you can do peritoneal dialysis for $3 or $4 a day. This still we think we can manufacture for maybe $600 US, and it will last up to 5 years. If you think about the costs that I told you a few moments ago, this is a radical reduction in cost, which will, we believe, transform the access to dialysis around the world. And it's part of an ecosystem. Here's the still over here. The whole thing's controlled by a smartphone, which would come free with the system. Data would go back to a central base, and we would have a local, low-cost, blow-fill seal production facility for making the empty bags. It eliminates the cost of central manufacture of peritoneal dialysis bags, and to build a factory to make bags costs about $250 million. And it eliminates the huge transport costs of getting a bag from where it's manufactured to where it's used. we think it's going to be a breakthrough. Well, where are we up to with the project? We spent last year, 2017, building a prototype in our engineering workshop here in Sydney and proving that it actually does work and it actually can make pure water for dialysis. We've hired an engineering team, we've built a little workshop, and I have to say that the fit out of the workshop was sponsored by a philanthropic foundation. A wealthy family gave us some money to fit it out. And we've used the fact that we have a working prototype to raise funds. We've raised now $5.3 million, largely from government and philanthropic sources. The Paul Ramsay Foundation, Australia's leading charity, gave us some money, and the New South Wales government has a medical devices fund, and they gave us some money. So we think that for $5.3 million, which we're quite proud of raising, will be enough to build out our system, to test it in patients, and to bring it to the market. So in 2019, we're going to be refining the design, and you can see one of the many CAD pictures that we made of the little still. In 2020, we're planning to be doing clinical trials here in Sydney and getting some volunteer dialysis patients to try our system and make sure that it works. Then we're going to put it into the Therapeutic Goods Administration, our national regulator of medical devices, get it approved for use here in Australia. And then we're going to head out to the developing countries of this world and offer it to dialysis clinics in developing countries to see if we can't save some of those 7.5 million people who are dying every year. So to summarise my talk, there has been a serious lack of innovation in dialysis. Studies of new approaches in haemodialysis, and there's been quite a few of them, haven't really led to improvements in patient outcomes. And the information we have shows that outcomes vary enormously around, just depending on how well it's done. I do think that new methods in peritoneal dialysis have lowered the peritonitis rate, and I'm excited to share with you the news that the Affordable Dialysis Project is an Australian innovation which could bring dialysis to millions of people around the world who currently can't afford it. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak to you this afternoon.
While you're still here, John, just thank you very much for participating with us this afternoon. Does anybody on the floor have any comments at this stage or questions? I'm a little bit mind blown by that development and the PD. I was on PD and just even seeing the peritonitis rates come down that significantly is huge.
It's encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so encouraging because you'd hear the bad stories when you were starting PD that people, the biggest risk was having infection, and I was lucky enough to get through 8 months no infection, but that's great.
So you're part of the good news story.
I'm part of the good news story, which is great. Any questions at the moment? Yes, sorry, Charlie has got a mic for you.
Sorry, you have to wait for the microphone, otherwise the people online can't hear.
So I'm also a big advocate of peritoneal dialysis, but in some of the groups that I've volunteered with over the last 5 or 6 years, it kind of became apparent that the rate of peritoneal dialysis, at least here in Australia, is quite low compared to haemodialysis. Why do you think that is?
This is a seriously good question, and it's a seriously hard one to answer. I'm ashamed of the fact that in my lifetime there's never been a randomised control trial comparing peritoneal dialysis to haemodialysis. You can hear doctors rabbiting on in every forum about the importance of randomised control trials to work out which is the best treatment, and yet we've never compared PD with HD. There is strong commercial interest in HD as a treatment. I think the profit margins are larger. It's a $135 billion industry around the world, and that kind of money speaks with a loud voice. There's evidence that people on peritoneal dialysis tend to do better than people on haemodialysis, but that's not randomised data. Maybe it's what we call selection bias, which means that people had better health when they went on PD than when they went on HD. So I have two things to say about it. Firstly, we still need a randomised control trial to tell us which treatment is the best. The second is that the World Congress of Nephrology, the International Society of Nephrology, has now come out with a PD first policy for the world. And I know that quite a few kidney units, I learnt the other day that the Prince Alfred kidney unit, which is one of the biggest in the country, has a PD first policy. So I think that the pendulum is swinging towards PD. I don't want to sound like a salesman for PD, because I think both systems have pluses and minuses, and it depends very much on the individual patient and their choices and their lifestyle as to which treatment is better. But PD First is a movement which is sweeping the world, and I think if I had to go on dialysis tomorrow, I would probably want a nocturnal PD cycler so I could still hold down my job during the day. But the mix of science and commercial interests in this space around the world makes it a really fascinating and really tough place to work.
I might add, and I'm looking at Michelle to find out how much I'm allowed to say, but Baxter have supported a trial in China for a number of years about PD versus hemo, which I gather is going to report later on this year. So we will get some data about that, and so we will see. We will see.
Any question? Oh, you got one more.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, just as a patient, PD is a whole lot more messy than the other, and the other is there, and you can go in there, as painful as it is. I'm allergic to needles, but painful as it is, you do that. PD seems so messy. I've been on this for 4 years now, but what I saw initially with PD was too messy.
Well, I think we'll take that as a comment, as they say on Q&A. I've had a few health problems. I've never needed dialysis, so I guess I'm speaking from a complete lack of personal experience. But the best thing I can say is that we're fortunate in this country to have both systems available to us and paid for by the taxpayer, because that is not the case in most countries in the world.
Well, maybe if they could make it sound a little better. Because when I was taught, when I went through it all, it sounded so messy, and that I didn't really want to be there, you know.
I think we are lucky as patients. Being a patient myself, when I was on PD for 9 months, and I loved it. It was fantastic for me. I used to be able to do it out of the back of my 4-wheel drive, go and watch all my kids play sport, a whole heap of thing. For me, it was fantastic. And I think that's the really good thing in our country, that it's about patient choice, and it's about making those informed decisions, and we make those decisions based on a whole heap of different things. So, yeah, I think it's very exciting that we can choose and we have those options. Thank you so much, John. Have we got any questions?
I've got one more, which is the infection you mentioned is one of the bigger problems with peritonitis. In the affordable dialysis machine, is there a concern about infection with the way that's put together?
The system offers an interesting approach to infection. Because we're boiling water to make steam to sterilise the water, which then goes into the PD bag, we have steam available. So some of that steam is taken through a tube into a little capsule, and there's a little rig. So you put the two halves of the connection together in the rig, you close the lid, and steam comes through and sterilises the entire area before the connection is made. So at least in principle, because we have the steam available, we think that our system could further reduce peritonitis rates. And it's certainly, if it's being used in a dusty village in remote India, the fact that the connection's being made in a steam-filled environment ought to mitigate against the risk of additional peritoneal dialysis. I did think, Stephen, someone was going to ask me if we have enough money or if we're still open for donations for the Affordable Dialysis project. And in case there are some extremely wealthy dialysis patients in the room or listening online, don't hesitate to get in touch with us at the George Institute if you do have a large amount of money you don't know what to do with and you'd like to support our project. Our door is very much open.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, John.
Fantastic.